when we go online. Hi, my name is Stephen Blank. I'm the editor and publisher of Blank Slate Media, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our discussion of the 2020 election. Let me start by introducing our four panelists. Robert Zimmerman, the co-president of ZE Creative Communications and a Democratic National Committee man. Bruce Blakeman, a member of the Hempstead Town Council and the Nassau County Republican Party's liaison with the Trump campaign. Tracy Edwards, a commissioner of the New York State Public Service Commission and the Long Island regional director of the NAACP. And Lawrence Levy, the executive dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies at Hofstra University. Let me jump right in and say many people are talking about, and it seems that this election, we can almost take it from top to bottom, that this has become a national election, even when you're talking to people in the state assembly and the state senate and Congress, because so much of what's impacting local is coming down from a national level. So let me see what you think. Many people are saying this is the most consequential election in our lifetimes. They seem to say that in other elections, but this time they seem to really mean it. So Robert, I'll let you take on what you see is the importance of this election, starting with the presidential election.
You know, you framed it very well, Steve. And first of all, thank you for having us all together and joining you on this panel. I think it's a great way to connect and talk about all politics is local. That's true. But in this case, our local politics is greatly affected by what's happening nationally. And it really doesn't matter whether I think this is the most important election in our lifetime. What really is extraordinary about this moment is that Donald Trump's own top advisors, the people he put in the highest positions in his administration, have said it's the most important election in our lifetime. Donald Trump's former Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, who he said was his finest appointment. General Mattis said Donald Trump's a threat to our Constitution and seeks to divide our nation. Senator Dan Coates, who Donald Trump made the director of national intelligence, he testified under oath that Russia was attacking our democracy to help Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. And he left his office, and after he left, he said he was convinced Vladimir Putin had something on Donald Trump. John Kelly, President Trump's own chief of staff, left the White House and said that Trump was so incompetent, he was played by the leader of North Korea, and of course went on record discussing the way Donald Trump mocked those soldiers who sacrificed for our nation, calling them losers. And you go right down the list, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who described President Trump's lack of leadership in language I can't repeat on this channel, on this broadcast. General McMaster, the National Security Advisor. Donald Trump's own top leadership team has left his administration. I didn't bring up John Bolton, but they've all left, pointing out what a threat he is to our Constitution and our democracy. That's why this election's so important. And that's why the Biden-Harris ticket provides a balanced, stable alternative to the type of incompetence and weakness and corruption that we see in the White House.
Bruce, I'm guessing from what I see in the background, you're going to disagree somewhat. So let me get your response.
Well, I think that if you look at the record of Joe Biden versus President Trump, I think there are stark differences. And I think it is one of the most, if not the most consequential election in the history of America, because you have one party that is drifting very, very far to the left. They've become an extremist party, a party that embraces socialism, that is not pro-military, and that does not project the type of America, an America filled with optimism and opportunity, that Donald Trump does. And when you look at the record, prior to COVID-19, President Trump's administration had the greatest economy in the history of America. When you look at a president who the Democrats said would drive us into war in 2016, that he was a madman. Instead, he's become the president of peace. There is peace around the world. There is peace in the Mideast. Historic peace agreements between Israel, Bahrain, Sudan, the UAE. Nobody would have predicted that that could happen. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Every president has promised to do that, including Barack Obama. They never did it. They didn't have the courage. They said that it would cause a war. Instead, peace is broken out. So this is a president of peace. This is a president of a strong economy. This is a president that is optimistic. This is a president that has faith in people, not the government. And this is a president that will continue to lead our country in the next 4 years to make America greater than we've ever been.
Thank you. Larry, I'll give you your chance to comment on this.
I'd be perfectly honest with you. I'm not sure what my role is here. I'm not going to give a campaign speech for one side or another. I haven't heard anything to analyze. I'm not going to fact check. What I can do as the exalted executive dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies is to try to frame it in a suburban context, which I think is the whole ball of wax in terms of this election. The suburbs have determined the winner of every presidential race, with the possible exception of one in 2012. And there are all kinds of arguments about how the exit pollsters defined the suburbs. The winner in the suburbs has gone on to win the White House. And the party that has won more suburban seats in Congress goes on to control the gavel there. So this race is really about who can take the suburbs. Now, Long Island is what we call the quintessential United States suburb. It is a true swing area, but as most people know by now, we don't count because we're in a blue state. But how Long Island goes, if you keep a close eye on election night, if you watch the trends leading up to it, you will know, you'll have a very good idea of where the country is going. At present, according to most polls, Donald Trump is behind in the suburbs, particularly with suburban women, many of whom actually voted for the president 4 years ago. There are parts of the suburbs, it's the playing off the expression, a suburb is not a suburb is not a suburb. There are outer ring suburbs, those that are farther from the cities, where Trump did exceptionally well, and he's focusing his campaign there, looking for voters who are similar demographically, ideologically, politically to those in rural areas where he did very, very well. So I'm keeping my eye on the suburbs. People like Long Islanders all over the country are going to decide this pretty much in about 5 states. And unfortunately, our votes won't count in terms of who goes to the White House. But just to finish up in a slightly different direction, this race has come down to 3 things: COVID, COVID, and COVID. And I know the president actually said the same thing: COVID, COVID, COVID. Nobody cares about it. Biden has his take on that, but it's how the voters in this country, particularly in the swing suburbs, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, outside of Milwaukee, outside of Detroit, the Maricopa County, Arizona suburbs, a handful of them. It's how they see COVID, COVID, COVID. Do they see that President Trump showed the lack of leadership that Robert was talking about? Do they feel that, no, they were left to make their own choices and they're paying a price for it, but that's the course that the administration is taking for it, and focusing more on the economy? What they decide on COVID and on how they interpret it and where they live, which is the suburbs, will determine who wins this election.
All right. Tracy, another major issue has been the Black Lives Matter issue and the issue of systemic racism. What role do you see and the importance in this election in terms of determining the future course of relations?
I think it's, our humanity is on the ballot. We want to make sure that we elect someone that's going to bring us together, because we have been divided more than ever before. You know, I had the benefit personally of being raised by a Democratic mother and a Republican father. This is not my father's Republican Party. This is not Bruce Blakeman's Republican Party, even though that he has a Trump sign behind him. We have divided so much that it is fear that's on the ballot. Our race relations have been challenged. We have been pushed and pulled between deciding whether you are pro-police or against police brutality. And you can be 100% pro-police and 100% against police brutality. But somehow this nation has gone to the point where you need to choose, and you don't need to choose. Our civil rights, people like John Lewis died for voting rights. That's on the ballot. And COVID is a big issue, because if you look at who is dying from COVID, it is our senior population, and it is disproportionately impacted minorities. So when you have a president administration that's talking about herd, you're looking at a party that's willing to allow people to die. And who are those people? It's our senior population. It's our minority population. We have to be able to move forward together. And my fear is, if the president is elected, which I do not believe he will be, but if the president is elected, we will go further and further away from each other. And that's not where we need to be. We need to be coming closer and closer together.
Bruce, let me ask you a question, and both Tracy and Robert have kind of raised a question, which is Donald Trump a traditional Republican? Is he something that is, does he fit the mold of that? Because, and this is important, both nationally, of course, and locally, because is he the Republican Party now? Has there been a change, or has this always been the Republican Party? Stuart Stevens, who has run a bunch of campaigns for Republicans, says he's come to the conclusion, unhappily, even though he's run many Republican campaigns, that this is what it is, and he doesn't like it. But your opinion, is this the Republican Party today, and is this what the Republican Party always has been?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say to Tracy, this is not the Democratic Party that your mother joined. This is a far left socialist party that is going to destroy the American economy and is not good. Socialism hasn't worked anywhere throughout the world, throughout history. And yet your party has been constantly moving in that direction. With respect to Donald Trump is not a career politician. Donald Trump is a business person. He's results oriented. He's bottom line. Let's talk about race. Joe Biden was in government for 47 years. He had the opportunity to fix things. He had the opportunity to do things. And by the way, there's only one segregationist in this race, and the segregationist is Joe Biden. So,
Bruce, stop.
Well, he is. You know that he voted against anti-busing. He didn't want his kids to go to school with little black children. That's part of the record. But let me finish. I'll let you finish. Let me finish. Let's not turn this into debate number one. Let me finish. With respect to the African American community,
is Donald Trump? We can talk.
Do we have a mute button on, or am I going to get a chance to answer? You're asking me about whether he's traditional or not. This is a president who passed the Criminal Reform Act, something that Barack Obama and Joe Biden promised for 8 years. So kids who were buying or selling nickel bags of pot wouldn't have a criminal justice hearing and wouldn't be incarcerated. This is a president that brought African-American unemployment to its lowest levels ever.
Bruce.
Black
You're
wages
Stop.
are at their
And-
highest.
and-
You don't want to hear this. You don't want to hear the facts. You
Well,
see, you're
Bruce,
not going to let me
Bruce,
talk
I
because you
would like to
don't
hear-
want to hear the facts. I
what
didn't interrupt anybody. I'm the only one getting
Bruce,
interrupted.
Bruce, I'm asking you to answer. I am the host and the moderator here. I get to ask the questions.
And I get to answer them the way I want to answer them.
Well, you're not answering the question.
I am answering the question. I'm talking about race.
I'm not talking about race. I'm asking
because
whether
as
Donald
part of the
Trump-
Republican Party wants African-American people to be successful. That's why the president passed the Criminal Reform Act. That's why the president
Bruce,
has brought down
really?
African-American unemployment.
All right.
Bruce,
you
Bruce.
see-
So Bruce, you know what the
But you
problem is?
don't wanna
When you're
deal in
talking about
facts.
African
The
Americans,
fact of the matter is,
jump right to criminal justice reform. That's
Let's go one at a time. But Bruce,
ridiculous.
I'll ask the question a third and final time. Is Donald Trump a traditional Republican as the Republican Party that we remember? John McCain is his successor to George Bush, John McCain, George Herbert Walker Bush. Is he in that? Does he fit in that mold, or is he something different? And does that mean that there's been a change in the Republican Party in Nassau County?
okay, so if you want a short answer to that question, there is nothing traditional about Donald Trump. But if you believe in a strong economy, if you believe in job production and increasing jobs, if you believe in a strong military, if you believe in religious freedom, if you believe in freedom of expression, if you believe that hardworking people of any race, religion, or ethnic background should have an opportunity to prosper, then Donald Trump is a Republican, and he is the type of Republican that we embrace here in Nassau County.
Steve, if I could just make a point.
Okay, go ahead, jump in, Robert.
I find that when I see this in politics on the local level, on the national level, when they can't defend their own candidates and when candidates can't defend themselves, they lie about their opponents. I mean, this issue of socialism was thrown against Bill Clinton when he ran for president, certainly thrown against Barack Obama when he ran for president. In fact, Donald Trump spread the racist lie that he wasn't even a citizen when he ran for president. And of course, now it's being used against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The reality to it is that we've seen what Donald Trump has done with this economy. He inherited a strong economy from Barack Obama. It was the largest consistent private sector job growth in the country's history. And because Donald Trump lied to the American people about COVID, lied about coronavirus, well documented on the Bob Woodward tapes.
That's not true.
We saw, excuse me, because of that, we saw how the mismanagement of coronavirus has not only spread massive infections and disease and death. We now have a new number of 85,000, a record in one day, the past 24 hours, 85,000 new infections of coronavirus, a record, but because of his mismanagement of this pandemic and his
Do you
lying to
think
American
Governor
people
Cuomo
about it,
handled it well
our
with the
economy
nursing homes?
collapsed.
11,000 people
Bruce,
died
Bruce,
in nursing
Bruce,
homes in New York
Bruce,
State.
By the way,
Why didn't he use the hospital
and by the way,
ship that the President Trump sent to New York? Why didn't he use the
Steve,
Javits
one
Center
thing
that
that
President
Bruce,
Trump
Bruce,
set up in New York?
Bruce,
Why were
let's
senior citizens
Fox
put
News.
back in nursing homes
Bruce,
when they were
please.
tested positive with the COVID-19
Steve, this isn't
virus?
Fox News. This isn't Fox News, Bruce, where you can just talk over your opponent when someone brings up facts you don't want to hear. And for
You
the
just
record,
did it.
I will proudly stand with Andrew Cuomo and his leadership compared to Donald Trump. He set a standard for our country.
Okay, let me
We'll all be proud of his work.
move to another point, which
Steve,
is
before you do though, let me
go ahead,
just say one thing. I find it really insulting that whenever someone who's representing Donald Trump talks about how they want to make sure that the African-American people succeed, and they run right to, we passed criminal justice reform. How insulting is that? that's the first thing that you're going to bring
It's
up.
pretty insulting that Joe
It's
Biden and
criminal
Barack
injustice.
Obama couldn't pass that.
Bruce,
I
Bruce,
find
please.
It was the
just-
cornerstone of the
I
NAACP,
find it so
Tracy.
insulting.
Wasn't
Bruce,
it a cornerstone
you know
of the
what? I will tell you,
NAACP's program?
as a mother, you should know that I can
How can you be
continue to
successful
talk
with a
over
criminal
anybody.
justice record?
So what I will tell you is, this is how low our politics have become, that we can't even have a discussion. We can't have a discussion.
Are
Because
African-American wages at an all-time high under President Trump?
Bruce is going to tell me about African Americans.
Are the wages at an all-time high under Donald Trump?
It's
fact.
Tracy,
something has happened. Something
Bruce,
has
fact check
happened
me.
to Bruce
4
and
million less people
to
with jobs.
the people that
And when he started-
represent Trump.
when he
Something
started.
has
By the way,
happened to
Tracy,
them.
I just have to bring up Jared Kushner's recent interview where he said the real problem that's faced with the black community is they don't want to succeed enough.
All right.
Remember that line?
Yes.
Yes.
That was completely taken out of context.
Yes, and
I don't
and
think that's fair.
All right,
And,
folks.
And somehow Bruce has now
Why don't you
become
mention the
talking
things that
point.
Joe Biden has
It's not
said?
him.
Guys,
Why
guys,
don't you
Something
mention the
has
things
happened
that
to
Joe
him.
Biden has
folks,
said
let me
about
let's
African
have a discussion.
Oh my
Guys,
gosh,
let's have a
Bruce.
that
Bruce,
when he
stop
talks
it.
about
What are you
educated
gonna
I have a
do?
white
Say your
kids,
best
Larry.
friend is
black
black
kids need
now?
more of
Stop.
We're not, we're
help.
not,
That's Joe Biden.
Stop, Bruce. Stop.
He said it.
This is
Tracy,
not who you
Bruce.
are.
Well, you don't want to
This
listen.
is
You don't want to
Tracy and
acknowledge
Bruce.
that he said it. You're not even
No,
acknowledging
this
that he
is
was a
not who you are,
segregationist.
Bruce.
It would be better if you just said he was and he changed.
Bruce.
all right.
Bruce.
Larry, let me ask you a question.
Really?
Given what we've seen so far in our discussion, do you see what the outcome here? Do you see that this polarization and the difficulty that we're having here to have a discussion? Do you see that this is something that is going to carry over through the election, through all the other ballots? Are we going to see, are we going to see people vote straight party lines now in a way that they have not before in elections that will impact elections here?
I don't know that I would say in a way they've never done before. I'm just old enough to remember when Assembly Speaker Joe Carlino in 1964, representing a very Republican district on Long Island, actually lost his own race and thus one of the most powerful positions in state government in the Johnson landslide. Then there was the Reagan landslide. History is filled with examples where the top of the ticket demolished everybody below it. If you're asking me, do I think it's going to be one of those years? It will be in some places, more likely in a place like Nassau County, but there's a caveat for that. I mentioned Nassau because it's been trending Democratic over the past decade or so, with very large exceptions. The largest town in America is still run by Republicans. Bruce is one of the council members there. One of the other largest towns, Oyster Bay, is run by Republicans. The county legislature is run by Republicans. So, which is why it's called a swing county. But it does lean Democratic. Its voting tendencies at the top of presidential tickets has been Democratic for a while now. So if if Donald Trump loses by not even large margins, but something significant, it's going to reverberate in Republicans down ballot losing who otherwise wouldn't lose. Suffolk County, however, you could have the reverse effect because there are great swaths of what we call Trump territory where the demographics look very much like red states and other places where the president is still likely to do well, maybe not as well as he has done, but he won't be underwater. Places like that, if the president doesn't fall too far, Lee Zeldin could be okay. If he falls farther, Lee Zeldin will get washed away in the so-called blue wave. So it really depends where you're talking about. We don't have national elections. And this discussion isn't what I'm talking about. We have 50 separate statewide elections. And within the states, we have dozens and dozens of races that are controlled by county election commissioners, the counting of the vote, the rules of what votes are valid, what aren't. So it's a very, very complicated process. It's going to play out very differently in different parts of the country. But the suburbs, for the large part, the ones that are contiguous to the cities are going to give a big vote for Joe Biden. The real question for Trump is whether the exurbans, the outer ring and somewhat ruralish suburban counties stay with him. And if that's the case, we're going to be counting ballots for a month.
So this goes to my next question, because things have been so calm.
Look how quiet everybody got. I guess I'm the peacemaker.
I'm trying to,
Brilliant.
now I'm going to try to roil things up a little, because you've made us calm. The question is now that here's the easy question. And we know they're going to be different answers, but who is going to win the national election, and when will we know it?
Well,
Robert, I'll give you first crack.
the one thing we know to be true is that this election is not going to be determined by voting. The election by people voting by absentee ballot and voting by direct ballots is not going to produce massive fraud or international conspiracies. We know that because Donald Trump's own top advisors pointed out that Donald Trump was wrong when he said that. The FBI director said there is no evidence that's ever been presented showing there's widespread conspiracy and fraud. His director of election security and homeland security, Bill Ivolino, so there's no example of foreign governments controlling absentee ballots. So we know that all Donald Trump's talk about trying to discredit this election by claiming the absentee ballots are fraudulent or there are foreign powers controlling the absentee ballots is patently dishonest and deceitful. Even his attorney general had to apologize when he said he found ballots in the river because the Department of Justice said that was incorrect. I bring this up for the following reason.
They were in the ocean.
Nice, not even a good try, Bruce. The point is, it's not a joke. People risked their lives and gave their lives defending our democracy. And our election should not be, our electoral process should not be diminished by a president trying to demean it, trying to lie about it, to try to save his own political soul.
But Robert, who do you think is going to win?
I think we're on a
When
path.
are we gonna, and when will we know that?
I think we're on a path to see a Biden-Harris victory. I don't accept the conventional wisdom that we're all so polarized that we can't come together. I just say I saw what Tracy Edwards did on Long Island with her rallies for criminal justice reform, for Black Lives Matter. She brought together whites and blacks, and she brought together young people with older people. It was a very unifying island-wide grassroots activism. And we're seeing that record activism around our country. The voting, the early voting already is more than 50% of the total vote in 2016. In the state of Texas, the early voting is over 85% of the total voting. The early voting in Texas is already 85% of the total vote in 2016. So you're seeing a level of activism and I think new voters and new energy. And the fact that we have Georgia in play as a battle, as a toss-up. Texas is a toss-up. North Carolina is a toss-up. We know that's true because that's where Donald Trump's running around campaigning. He went to Nebraska, which has always been a solid Republican area. And because part of Nebraska is a toss-up. The point I'm making is I believe that we're going to see a coming together in this country in this election for Joe Biden and the opposition to Donald Trump represents. How long it will take, I don't really care. What I do care about is making sure the votes are counted. I didn't see anything in the Constitution, even Bruce can't find in the Constitution, a clause that says we have to know by election night or the day after election day. I guarantee you, there'll be challenges on absentee ballots. It'll go to the courts. That's proper.
Reminds me of
Here's
Chicago.
my
The
point.
Democrats
The critical
will first
point-
see how many votes they need
We'll go-
before they
point.
declare a winner or a loser.
What we have to look out for.
We've seen this before. This is Chicago all over
What we
again.
have to look out for.
I thought it was
But
Westbury.
I'd like to answer your question, Steve.
Let me finish my point.
I'd like to
Let me
give.
finish my point. then
I'd
you
like
can
to answer your
question.
question.
What we have to look out for and
Let Robert
be careful
finish
about,
and then we'll let you.
what we have to look out for and be careful of is a strategy by Donald Trump, which he announced during the debates, of challenging the absentee ballot process to try to win in the Supreme Court what he won't be able to win in the ballot box. So on the ballots, Biden
So you're saying that if there is fraud, we should just ignore it?
No, I'm saying let's not create a fraudulent argument to undermine the electoral.
Well, you haven't seen the ballots yet, so you don't know.
Bruce, do you think that there will be fraud in this election?
Yes.
Okay, on what kind of scale?
Because there is always a certain amount of fraud. There's always a certain amount of political hijinks. But I'd like to get back.
He did not find any fraud.
Excuse me?
They did not find any fraud.
Who did not find any fraud?
Chris Kovach had a commission appointed by the president. They did not find any fraud.
Okay.
There have been studies. They do not.
Okay. If you don't believe that there aren't people out there that are trying to commit voter fraud, then I think that you're living in a fantasy world that really doesn't bear any reality, any existence.
Nobody has found any.
Let's talk about your question. I'd like to answer your question.
Go to it.
I'd like to get back to the question. The Democrats always like to throw up all these side diversions because they don't want to talk about the record. But the fact of the matter is, I agree with Larry. I agree with Larry that there could be something out there. And I believe what it will be is in Nassau County, I believe there will be a red wave. I believe that there's an undercurrent. I believe that there's a tremendous amount of support for President Trump in Nassau County. And I actually think it'll be the opposite of a Democratic tidal wave, if you will. I think there'll be an area of much surprise to many of the pundits that Nassau County actually is pro-Trump and that he carries Nassau County. I really believe that. I think the enthusiasm is greater. People can't wait to vote. The rallies that have been held. So I think he's going to win Nassau County. But with respect to the national election, basically, I think this is going to be a rerun of 2016. I think that the Democrats are going to keep what they had in 2016. I think the Republicans are going to keep what they have. And I think basically what's going to happen is that the president will be reelected for 4 more years.
Okay, and when will we know? How long are we going to know? Are we going to know election eve? Are we going to have a good sense? Larry, let me ask you this, because we know that there are states that early vote and that count their mail-in votes as they receive them. Florida is one of those states. Arizona is another state where we'll have early totals. There's several other states there. Is that going to give us a good enough indication of what the outcome is going to be nationally, or are we going to wait? Are we going to have to wait beyond this?
I hate giving answers that start with "it depends," but it depends. It depends on whether one side or another and how extensively they decide to challenge the election through the courts or even on the streets. So that's going to determine how long things take to get an official acknowledgement by, enough so that it's 2000, nobody was happy, but Al Gore accepted it. 1960, Nixon believed that, Bruce loves to bring up Chicago, that Chicago stole the election, but he decided for the good of the country, he wasn't going to push it. If Trump or Biden wins, it depends on how they challenge it. But I think that in Nassau County, you'll know pretty early in the process who won. You won't know by how much, but there are certain bellwethers. I mean, Bruce and Robert know this. You go into an election, you pick 10 election districts, you know their history, and they will tell you before the votes are counted where things are going. Same nationwide. There are reporters and political scientists and operatives from both parties who have their bellwether districts, and they'll know. They'll know even perhaps before the polls close based on turnout in certain precincts. So there's a chance if it is the blowout that Robert thinks or the blowout that Bruce thinks. Well, Bruce didn't say a blowout, neither.
I didn't say a blowout either.
No, you didn't, and you're right. But if the victory is significant, 30 or 40 electoral votes, maybe 50 electoral votes, you'll know that relatively early from an informal standpoint. But then the shouting begins, maybe.
No, I think that
Tracy,
the voter suppression that has been going on around the country has really worked to the opposite, where you see so many people that are out on lines that want to make sure that they vote. When you try to take the vote away from people, like what has been happening across the country in certain areas, especially in the minority areas, it sent a signal that you must vote. It's critical to vote. And that's why I believe you see the lines that are undeniable, that continue today in the rain, right here down the street at the firehouse. People want to vote. People want to decide this election, not have the courts decide the election. People want to decide the election, which is why I think that there is such a big turnout.
Well, Tracy, I think people want the people to decide this election the way they want it to go. And depending upon how it turns out, a lot of those people who want to let the people decide may take umbrage, including Democrats, may take umbrage in the courts as well.
But Larry, what's on now, though, is I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just plain democracy, that you do not want the allegations of voter fraud and the challenge going to the Supreme Court. Neither side wants that. They want to decide the election by voting.
I don't think,
And
Tracy.
that's why I believe that people are out like they are.
Tracy, I think you're right about the voters. I don't think either voter from either party wants to see this decided by the courts.
That's
And the
right.
fact that we have literally, I find this stunning, already at this stage, over more than half of the vote, 80 million votes, I think, 79 million votes have been cast. That's almost 50% or slightly above 50% of everyone who voted in 2016. So there's a demand to speak and have people demand to have their voices heard. And that's encouraging. I don't think the voters want to see the courts decide this. I think it has been Donald Trump and the Republican Party's tactic from day one to undermine this election, to try to yell
Hillary
corruption
Clinton
about
told
the
Joe
process.
Biden
And to let
not
the
to
court-
concede under
let the
any
court-
circumstances, Robert.
That
Come
was never
on.
said. That was never said,
Every
Bruce.
vote was,
She said that. It's on tape.
No, Bruce, I heard the tape. She said on election night, don't concede, let the votes be counted.
Oh,
Because we
okay.
expect that, Bruce, we're talking, and I go back to this point.
On election
This is
night,
not
before you know
democracy.
anything, don't
This is not a
concede.
This is not a
Got it.
political game. It's not a game of gotcha. It's about standing up for our democracy, which is under attack. It's under attack by foreign governments like Russia. We know this from Donald Trump's top advisors. And now our democratic voting process is under attack in the court challenges and voter suppression of the Trump
Well,
candidate.
we know the Chinese are trying to buy Democratic candidates like Joe Biden.
Oh, my goodness.
My goodness, Bruce. You know, the Republican
Did
National
you see Mr. Bobolinsky's interview? He was pretty convincing,
The
and he's a Democrat.
See, that's the
He's a
opposite
lifelong
phrase.
Democrat,
Focus on that
and he's
phrase.
a military veteran,
Yeah,
and
Bruce,
he testified
here we go. Here we go again.
to
When
the
you-
corruption
but Bruce,
Joe
we'll let-
Biden.
We'll let
But
you speak. Let Robert
by,
finish.
by foreign governments.
But here's the point. When we don't have facts, we use phrases like pretty convincing. When the Republican, like you just did, Bruce, when the Republican National Committee chair was asked on Fox News, can you give us an example, any evidence that Joe Biden took money from the Chinese in any form? The Republican National Committee chair said, well, I guess that needs to be investigated. She had no facts, she had no evidence, neither do the Republicans. And there's an old rule of
You
politics.
had
Don't
someone
believe
who was a
anything we hear.
Democrat who got up and said that was
You're
the
interrupting
case.
me again, Bruce. You're trying to talk over me again.
Go
This
on
isn't Fox
YouTube.
News.
It's all over
This is
YouTube. You won't see it on traditional media because
This
they're
is
all
not
against
Fox
President
News, Bruce.
Trump. They don't
Go
want him
on
to
Well,
win.
we can discuss YouTube and other sources of
Yeah.
information. That's an entire
it's-
discussion.
It's sad to hear this level of
Let me ask you this, Bruce. President Trump has declined to say whether there'll be a peaceful transition if he lost. He has said twice he's declined to say it. Is that acceptable to you?
There will
You can't
be
get
a
three
peaceful transition. I am hopeful that the election will be decided on election night or sometime in the early morning of the next day. I'm hopeful of that. I feel confident about that. And I also feel confident that Donald Trump will be our president for the next 4 years.
Why isn't Donald Trump called for a peaceful transition? Why is it you and not him?
You know what? I think basically because you have to ask that question, knowing his personality, he's probably just giving you something to get bent out of shape about, because he takes a lot of pleasure in doing that to Democrats.
He's betraying
Well,
the very,
and
he's
there
betraying
goes
the very
my- and
principles
that
of our
goes-
country.
And that goes back to my first point, is we need to have someone that's going to unify us. That's
And
what we need.
And also respect our.
Well, I suppose we could be unified and all walk off a cliff together, but I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
I don't think we're gonna walk off a cliff together, Bruce, but I
Well-
think you should head down there, because if you're saying that there's going to be a peaceful transition, and
Of course,
if,
there's going to be a peaceful transition.
What
and I'm
happens-
saying if, but the candidate isn't saying it though. The candidate isn't saying it. You are, and I'm not surprised that you are,
And by
but the
way, this is what
candidate is not saying.
It goes back to Tracy's point. This is the Republican Party I grew up with that, of course, respected the peaceful transition of power. This was the principles of George Herbert Walker Bush and of John McCain and George W. Bush. The fact that this president, Donald Trump, will in fact betray the very core principles that define American exceptionalism, the very ideals that made America unique to the world.
Let me respond to that. Let me respond to that, Robert. You know, when Barack Obama won election in his first term, I did not support Barack Obama, but when he won the election, I said, you know what? Good for America. They decided to go in a different direction. Hopefully, this will put racism in the rearview mirror. I think Barack Obama and Joe Biden had a chance to unify America. I think in their 8 years, what they did was they divided America, didn't bring us together. And basically, that's why we are where we are now. And I think Donald Trump is a result-oriented business person. He's not going to be in the style that everybody loves. He may not be the guy you want at your Thanksgiving dinner table, but you can't argue with the results on the economy, on peace, on the things that are important to Americans.
So let me segue.
That's a big segue too.
Let me segue. Well, let me ask one quick question for Robert. Maybe Larry will discuss this. What happens if it does go, if it's a close race, ballots are challenged, and Amy Coney Barrett casts a deciding vote, which will impact the election?
It
What
will,
are the Democrats going to
if
do?
it reaches the level where Donald Trump wins this White House.
As it did in
based upon-
2000, similar to what happened in Florida.
But first of all, if Amy Coney Barrett is in fact the deciding vote, and in fact Donald Trump wins the White House, this will destroy the credibility of the Supreme Court for a generation. This will turn the Supreme Court into a partisan institution, not an institution of legal scholars who are supposed to be above politics.
Even if she's right on the facts and the law, Robert?
I can assure,
Why are
frankly,
you prejudging her?
I'm-
She has had a
I'm
history
prejudging, I'll tell you why I'm
of being
prejudging her.
someone of the
You asked me,
highest
I'll tell you why.
integrity, of the highest morals, and you're already impugning
I am.
that she would do something dishonest. That
And
is
I'll tell you why.
disgraceful.
I'll tell you why I am. Because by any standard of decency and ethics, she should recuse herself.
Oh, come
Any
on. There's
role
no
in this-
Democrat Supreme Court justice that ever recused themselves from a vote because they were nominated by a Democrat president. That has never happened.
There's never been a Supreme.
Politics
Bruce,
isn't supposed to play
Bruce, are you
into
going to
the
talk over me or let
equation.
me answer your question?
Let him,
There's never been a Supreme Court justice appointed this close to a presidential election by an incumbent president.
So
in the
what?
history of our country.
So
She is
what?
clearly there. And Donald
Is
Trump
there anything unconstitutional about it?
actually, it speaks to the hypocrisy and deceit of the Republicans when they said,
Okay,
no
it's
one should ever be
constitutional,
appointed.
it's allowed by law,
Excuse me, Bruce.
it's something that
Excuse
you
me,
would
Bruce,
have
don't you-
recommended as the Democrat national
Here
committeeman
we
because
go.
you're a smart guy,
Bruce,
Robert.
Bruce,
You're a good
Bruce, you're
guy
talking
and you're
over
a
me 'cause you
political
can't hear
guy
the facts.
and you're good at what you do.
Bruce,
And if
Bruce.
it was a Democrat president, you would have said, absolutely go forward.
No, because I'll tell you the difference, Bruce. It's the Republicans and Donald Trump who said, never appoint a president in the a Supreme Court justice in the year of a presidential campaign. That was their charge. That was their pledge to the American people. And once there was an opening, they even violated the Abraham Lincoln rule. Lincoln had the chance to do something very similar to Donald Trump right before an election. And he said it would be too divisive for the country and the people should make the choice with their choice of a new president. That was in 1864.
Well, if you
And what we're
believe the
seeing
polls,
here
the
is
majority of
truly
Americans
unprecedented.
believe that she should have
And
been
Amy
confirmed and
Barrett-Comey,
confirmed now.
once again, you're talking over me. This is the Fox News game. Whenever
True
you
or
hear
not?
facts, you don't want to accept. Whenever you want to hear facts, you don't want to accept. You just try to ignore them. Amy Coney Barrett is actually compromising herself by not recusing herself. She should absolutely not vote on this matter.
Okay, so let me ask the question. Let me ask Larry, try to go to the issues. What do you believe are going to be, what is going to be the issue or issues that is going to decide the race in terms of what's going to sway voters?
The first top three issues are COVID, 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 depending upon how they see the pandemic. Do they see it more from an economic perspective? Could cut both ways. It depends on how they've been affected by it. It depends on what their expectations are, the kind of business they're in, the kind of community they live in. If they look at it from a health perspective, it'll probably cut pretty badly for the president, who's hoping to kind of get a draw out of this issue. Polls show that it's not working, but you know, everybody still remembers 2016, and I can't find a professional Democrat, much less pollster, who's willing to bet their life that the outcome is going to be as wide a margin of victory for Biden as the polls show. However, pollsters, Republican, Democrat, missed it 2016 with very few exceptions, learned from it. They've adjusted their polling. I personally think that the average of the 100 polls is probably where things are now, but it's a snapshot. Things can change. What keeps Democrats up at night and what keeps Republicans going in the face of the polls is that, again, it's 50 statewide races and 42 of them are decided already. The polls in the states that aren't decided are much closer. Biden is outside the margin of error in most of them, but if you know the term drawing it inside straight, that is, you've got cards that aren't very promising, and in order to make it a good hand, you've got to pull the absolute exact cards to make it all fit together. Well, Trump has to do that, but every one of those cards are still in the deck 5 days away. Pennsylvania is still in play. I'm not sure Michigan is anymore. I'm not even sure Wisconsin is, particularly because of the viral surge. Arizona's in play. North Carolina's in play. I think you can call me up and make fun of me, but I think Texas and Georgia are fantasies at this point. Maybe not 4 years from now, they'll probably be a real toss-up. It's just a handful of states, and how things break, how turnout is affected by the local organizations, which really handle it with national money. This is still very much a live race. Neither candidate, Trump's not dead, and Biden can't take a victory lap. And the suburbs will decide it.
Let me ask you something about the suburbs in New York or in, blue states like New York. You have this disparity where the Senate, you have Republicans with a majority, but Democrats, if you add the votes up, have a lot more votes. you see that happen in a lot of places where there is the Electoral College favors the smaller, the more rural states, the white states that are whiter, less representative of maybe, or different from the urban areas. Do you see this as I see that a lot where New York with New York City with a big urban area, California, large population, that they are underrepresented in in places like the Senate and the Electoral College.
If you're asking, is the Electoral College fair? I don't even think it's a moot question. Lyndon Johnson won an enormous sweep in '64 with the Electoral College. Bill Clinton won with the Electoral College. Barack Obama won with the Electoral College. Donald Trump won with a minority of the votes, but he was running in the system that we had. If you said to the Republican or Democratic presidential candidate, we're no longer doing Electoral College, we're going to go with a national vote, well, they're going to campaign differently. Trump's going to show up in Wyoming, and Biden's going to show up in other intensely bright blue states. So I don't think you can really look at it like that. It's a system we've got. If you're talking about should we change the system, a couple of caveats. One, it's a unicorn. It's never going to happen. You need a constitutional amendment, I believe. I'm not a lawyer, and you need 2/3 of the states, and most of those states see themselves as benefiting from this by disproportionate representation. So I don't spend a lot of time on theoretical stuff.
Is New York? Do you think New York and the suburbs are being hurt though by the disparity in population in the U.S. Senate, for instance, where you have Wyoming and Montana and South Dakota? Those are places that have like the population of Queens, and they have 6 senators between them.
Well, no. Wyoming has 2 senators. Everybody has 2 senators.
Right.
And I think Wyoming has 1 member of Congress.
Right.
I know where you're going, and I could make a case for both. I mean, let me give you a nightmare scenario. If I could wave a magic wand, I probably would want to eliminate the Electoral College. It doesn't make any sense. It leads to a lot of frustration. It leads to charges of illegitimacy. Trump didn't get the majority. He shouldn't be president. I mean, and this isn't good for the country. But the reality is, imagine if we had a national election with 120 million votes, and the candidates, after the Price is Right tabulation, are 20,000 votes apart. Where are you going to start your recount? Are you going to, Republicans are going to say you're going to do it in Lower Manhattan or AOC's district? Democrats are going to say you're going to do it in Wyoming. There are no Democrats to overlook it. It is a nightmare scenario.
Larry,
I think we've got the system we have. Democrats think it's, have won with it. Republicans have won with it. People just have to work harder, get out the vote. I hear everything you say about vote.
Larry,
the real issue. Can I speak now, please,
in the Constitution, it talks about the federal government. It talks about states.
Can I speak now?
Sure.
I really think that the bigger issue is the voter suppression that has
Where's
been
the
going
evidence
on.
of that?
Not the Electoral College. There have been laws that have been put in place that have been challenged just this week, overturned by the Supreme Court, that were true voter suppression. That's the evidence. The evidence is the Supreme Court ruled against it.
Why do you need government picture ID to get into the Democrat National Convention?
Here we have again something.
You can't require somebody
to
do that before they vote.
Bruce,
one at a time.
Something has happened to our politics where something has happened where a gentleman like Bruce Blakeman is now leaning into the Zoom and yelling. He's never done that before.
I'm not yelling. I'm asking you a question.
But you're not. But Bruce, you're not the moderator, though. I'm answering Steve's question. If you want to have a show, I would then answer you. I'm
you be on my
answering
show?
Steve's
You have an
question.
invitation.
And what
Robert
I
Zimmerman
think,
can
and
work
what
for
I
that for
think,
us.
Steve,
Well,
what I
let me
think,
speak.
Steve, is that the voter suppression efforts is the bigger issue, not the Electoral College. That's what I think. I think we should allow people to vote. And we should allow people
Only
to vote
once.
in the way that they can.
You know,
And
Tracy,
you know
I'm
what?
gonna-
And
I'm
when
gonna
Bruce and I ran, there were absentee ballots then too. So this is not a new phenomenon, absentee ballots. It's just not new.
Tracy, I'd like to, one point you made, I think is I agree with you very much that today it's about voter suppression. And you saw that with the Supreme Court challenges. I just want to point out to you, the court didn't rule in favor of, they ruled to allow the ballots to come in, but they also said in their ruling, they're going to revisit whether to count the ballots.
True.
In a
That's
future,
right.
in a new challenge. So in fact, you're still seeing the threat of voter suppression very present because whether they're allowing the ballots to come in, will they allow the ballots to be counted? That's our fear. But
That's
to your
true.
point, this the problem we faced for the past 4 years. In fact, the past 8 years on the local level is a deliberate strategy of voter suppression by demanding voter ID, birth
What's wrong with voter ID?
licenses.
What is wrong with
And,
voter
and,
ID?
you know, and the other thing
Give
is,
us
if
one rational,
I cast
one
my
rational,
vote,
Bruce.
one rational reason why voter ID is not something that we should do. You couldn't even
tell you
get
why,
into
Bruce.
your own convention without government picture ID. So why is it different to go and do something that is sacred?
I'll tell you why, Bruce.
Unless there
We're
are
gonna answer-
certain
You want-
people
Bruce, let
who
him answer the
want
question.
to engage
Answer the
in
question.
voter fraud.
First of all, as we know from Donald Trump's own FBI director, there is not any example of widespread voter fraud taking place. And there have been numerous studies from
We haven't had the
conservative
election
and
yet.
liberal think tanks. Am I going to answer the question, Bruce? Where voter fraud is, even Donald Trump's own commission was shut down because his own commission could not justify Trump's arguments of voter fraud. The problem with voter ID is simply this, that you're requiring people, if they don't have driver's licenses, first of all, the rule was first driver's licenses, but there are a lot of people, especially our elderly, who don't have cars. So they're disenfranchised. Then you're requiring people to go and get a birth certificate and pay for that. And then in fact, pay for different types of devices to get an ID. It's a form of a poll tax. It is by every measure, it's unethical, it's undemocratic, and it creates a tax on voting, which we should never allow in any form. The cost of a voter ID and what each state defines as a voter ID, by the way, is very discriminatory. So that's why it's wrong.
Okay,
But Robert,
I'm gonna ask first Tracy, then we'll let Bruce answer a question that Larry has
Bruce, are
already.
you going to let me answer the question?
I haven't said a word in at least
Okay.
Bruce,
90
all
Bruce,
seconds.
right.
you can mute.
I don't remember the
Bruce.
question anymore.
Okay, let me
Exactly.
ask the question.
This
which
is from the greatest baseball player from Valley Stream South,
Second best. John DeGrace was the best.
Okay,
the Republican leader.
Tracy, your view, what's the issue or issues that are gonna decide this election?
COVID. It is. That's what I believe. I think people are afraid. I think people want to survive. I don't think that we can boost our economy back to where we were if people are sick in the hospital. You know, we really need to come through this from a health perspective. We have to join together and do this in a way that we can all survive. So I think that is the biggest issue that is weighing on people's minds, and that's what I think people are voting on more than anything.
I don't
Okay,
agree. I don't agree.
Robert,
Either do I.
I don't believe it's COVID. I believe it's the way the Trump administration has responded to the coronavirus.
But that's
No one blames Donald Trump for the fact we have coronavirus, but in fact, we do hold him accountable for his incompetence, for his deceit to the American people, for his failure for in fact, defying his own government safety standards and healthcare standards, mocking people who wear masks, saying masks don't even work for 85% of the people. So we've never seen a president, literally, in fact, his own chief of staff said, we can't control the coronavirus. Their surrender, instead of mobilizing our country together in light of this crisis and uniting us to protect not just ourselves, but each other, is the worst failure of leadership we've ever seen from a president. So that's what
I'd like to respond to that, Steve.
All right, Bruce, we're gonna give you your turn to tell us what you think are the issues, going to be the major issues in determining this election.
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be the economy. I think people really are more interested in bread and butter issues. Usually it's either foreign policy or the economy, depending on whether or not we're at war or close to war. And since this has been the president of peace, the most peaceful president in the last 50 years, if you look in terms of American men and women who have died in battle, he's the most peaceful. The fact of the matter is that it's the economy. And that relates to COVID because Joe Biden's only plan for COVID-19 is to lock up the economy, to close things down. And basically, there's no science that proves that works. In fact, it hasn't worked any place around the world. What does work is the testing. I believe that masks help, and I think that that has been proven. And this is a president who increased production of PPE. This is a president
wearing a mask.
This is a president who provided ventilators,
Bruce,
so that not one person in New York State was without a ventilator. A hospital ship, a hospital, a Javits Center. He funded testing for millions and millions of tests to be done. And he's put more money into vaccines, not only the research for the vaccines, but the distribution is in place so that when we do have a vaccine, we won't have to wait, that it'll be distributed. And this is a president who has taken probably the biggest healthcare crisis in the last 100 years and managed it in a way that we are now at a point now where 99.8% of the people that contract the virus will not die. If one person dies, that's too many. But we can't control that.
There are 1,000 people
Science
dying a
and
day.
it's medicine, and
1,000
there's
a
more
day.
that the doctors don't know
Bruce,
than what the
1,000
doctors
died
do
today.
know.
Bruce, where are you getting
died.
that statistic about 199 point? But that's not
That's the
accurate.
CDC. You can go to their website tonight.
now you're
No.
into the
Directly from the
CDC.
CDC.
Oh, Bruce, 1,000 people died today.
Just today.
I think you're mixing up raw
99.8% of the
numbers
people who contract the
I
virus.
think you're all mixing up raw numbers with percentages. The
No.
death rate is about 1%. The death rate, the 1,000 people a day is in a country with 350 million people. You know,
The infection rate is
Thousands a lot.
79,000
that's
in one
two,
day.
two big airplanes crashing. But just be careful playing with statistics here, because you're both right and you're both wrong.
Let me be clear. The infection rate is now 79,000 in the past 24 hours.
That's not a rate, that's a number.
That's an infection number, rather. You're correct. The infection number is 79,000. The point simply is, this virus is only spreading farther. Dr. Fauci said it had to be at 10,000 per day so we can get control of it as we approach the winter months. It was 79,000 today as we're approaching the winter months. The infection, and in fact, it's not growing because of tests, like Donald Trump said. It's growing even exceeding tests. It's far ahead of the testing numbers.
You know, and at
So
the end
what
of the
you would
day,
do
let's
is
talk about
lock
people's
down-
lives. You can
what you
talk
would
about
do
the
is lock
percentage and the
down-
statistics.
What you
Talk
and Joe
about
Biden
people's
would do is
lives.
lock
Rose,
down the
Rose,
country.
I'm going to ask you to.
Just lock down the country.
That's not the answer.
We don't have to do lock down the
No one's
country.
saying lock down the country. But frankly,
Well,
we're
that's
heading
Joe
in that-
Biden's only
No,
plan.
he's not.
We're
No, it's
seeing-
not.
We're seeing now Republican governors shutting down parts of their states because they never controlled the infection rate, because they never controlled it, because the number of infections are growing. It's the
What state
failure
had
to
the
wear
most
masks.
deaths? What state had the most deaths, both gross
Bruce, this is
and
not
by
a
percentage of
This is
population?
not a
What
political
state?
game, Bruce. New
What
York
state was it,
New York
Robert?
State got hit
Robert,
first.
if you want to
and
play
got
that
hit
game,
hardest.
tell the
You're
people
playing a
watching
political
watching
game.
right now, what state had
Bruce.
the highest number of deaths?
All right, Bruce,
Bruce,
we
we got
can-
hit
New York
first.
State.
And we
Let
got
me
hit
ask-
first.
let me
we got hit
ask-
hardest.
Bruce, let me ask Larry a question. On the state of the economy. And you're a numbers guys who are looking at the statistics. Where are we right now in the economy? Bruce is saying that it's a strong economy. What are the numbers saying?
Well, I'm not an economist. I always have to say that. The economy, if you take a snapshot of where we are right this very second, the economy is in very bad shape, but economies are dynamic things, and there is somewhat of a recovery in play. The question is whether that recovery can be sustained considering the surge in COVID cases, whether people are dying or not, from the standpoint of the economy, it isn't as important. And I really hate using that word. It's how it affects the operation of businesses. And if governors, and now, as somebody said, Republican governors are starting to shut their states down, if they do that, then the economy is going to take a bigger hit. So, I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, where it's at now is we're somewhere between the Great Recession and the Great Depression. But, 3 months from now, if somehow we get 6 months from now, if we get things under control, there'll be a chance that a recovery can continue. Right now, though, with the resurgence, whether it's a second wave or a third wave, it does not look very good for the recovery.
Well,
But
can I respond to that? Could I
Sure.
respond to that? The GDP today, the numbers for the last quarter grew at the highest rate in the history of America, 33%. So I think the numbers do bear out that we're on a very strong recovery under President Trump. And I think that with the high tax policy of Joe Biden
Here we go.
and the fact that he wants to lock down our country, I
No,
believe
he
he will
doesn't.
destroy the economy, not only in the United States of America, but here on Long Island.
Okay, in terms of, let's talk about in terms of the economy, our area and the stimulus that has been proposed. We have the chairman of the Federal Reserve saying that the economy needs a lot of money. We have all 50 states saying that have suffered massive losses of revenue. New York State has lost $14.5 billion in revenue. That'll get passed down to municipalities, to towns, government. What's going to happen between now, right now, at least until after the election? Is there any likelihood that after, how quickly there can be a stimulus? There seems to be agreement that there's a need, but there was no ability to get that done. What happens in the interim? Or when do you think it's going to happen? And what happens in the interim to businesses? Bruce?
Somewhere around November 10th, November 11th, no matter who's president, there will be another stimulus package. I think that it's fair to say that right now, both sides are posturing with respect to that. So I think that when it's this close to election and the Democrats don't want to make the Republicans look good, certain Republicans don't want to make the Democrats look good, I think that basically we are less than a month away from another stimulus package that will not be as big as the Democrats want. It'll be bigger than what the Republicans want. It'll be based on compromise. It'll be based on need. And I'm very confident that we will be able to work together as Americans, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, to get a stimulus package to help the people in this country who desperately need help, people who are concerned about the future and concerned about their families.
Do you think it's going to include the money for states and municipalities? There's been a lot of discussion by Republicans in the Senate that they don't want to be paying for the problems that preceded the pandemic. I think it's been, the governors have said combined they're looking for $1 trillion. New York is looking for 14 billion. Do you think that the town of Hempstead would be a beneficiary of that? Do you think the money, are these state and local governments going to be made whole by this agreement?
The town of Hempstead was in an excellent position with respect to this crisis because we budgeted for the crisis. We had approximately $70 million in reserves just in case something like this happened. So we're going to be able to absorb, the loss of revenue, the tremendous loss of revenue. But I can't speak for other municipalities, and certainly the state government's in a shambles economically. It's before the pandemic, it was in shambles, and now it's even worse. So I think it depends on who wins the election as to whether or not governments that have not run their governments efficiently will have taxpayer dollars thrown at more mismanagement of government.
Now, the state of New York balances budget by law and pays as it goes for its pension.
Yeah.
So
This is
the
not
state
about
of
a
New York has,
and ends up with 50-60 billion dollar deficits. I think they're talking maybe $100 billion this year.
Bruce, this is not a red
Where does
state.
that number
blue
come
state.
from?
This-
That's
That's
that-
fictitious numbers.
I'm not taking sides here. I just haven't heard a number. That's 10 times larger than any number I've heard or seen from any remotely nonpartisan
A number of
organization.
legislators that I've talked to, Larry, are very, very concerned that the revenue numbers are way down, that basically there's been overspending, that the state and the city government haven't been living within their means, and that combined, that would be the deficit that they would be facing. And in fact, that number comes from the numbers that the governor asked for.
Look, here's the point that I think really we have to be
Okay.
mindful of, living on Long Island and living in New York State, that it's really absolutely disgraceful that we haven't had a package put through yet. I know it's easy to play politics and play the both sides game. It's worth noting that Nancy Pelosi put her proposal out 4 months ago, I believe, maybe 5 months ago, 4 months ago, to try to get a deal struck. And there has been absolute, not only no cooperation, really until recently, no negotiation. And the real fact of the matter is, I don't think anyone on this panel would argue with me, if Donald Trump's reelected and Mitch McConnell stays the majority leader of the Senate, then New York State and New York City and Long Island are in deep trouble, because there's no interest in supporting or helping us get out of this crisis that the coronavirus put us in, and that Washington put us in. And only through a Biden presidency and Chuck Schumer being the majority leader will there be any real relief or support for New York State. Let's not lose sight of that.
Tracy?
I agree. I was almost agreeing with Bruce, believe it or not.
We hadn't happened until we started quoting, making up numbers.
I was almost
Even a
there.
blind squirrel gets an acorn once in a while.
That's right. But it's disappointing that there hasn't been more relief, and I'm disappointed that the president is still talking in terms of red state relief and blue state relief. Because he's the president of all. And when you start talking about how the Democratic governors ran it into the ground, and it's not helpful. And and we as a blue state are going to need help to be able to get the full impact of our economy. And when you look at a lot of people, recovery for people who were behind means that the economy has recovered, but they're still behind. So we are going to need a lot of help and support after this election, regardless of what state that you're in. People are suffering.
Well, I think there's a difference. Tracy, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think there's a difference. I think Republicans want to give the money to the people directly, and Democrats want to give it to governments that have mismanaged their taxpayer dollars. So there is a fundamental policy difference.
Right,
we'd rather give the check to Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public than to some governor who's just going to spend it on some type of frivolous program that doesn't benefit anyone.
You mean like
well,
police
I would
and
say that,
fire and,
I'd like to
roads
respond to
and
that. I would like to respond to that.
Well,
because,
look,
there
Democrats wanted to fund the
are
police, Larry, didn't.
There are municipalities and there are governments where our first responders get paid. And we want to make sure that they stay employed. So we need to stop talking about giving it to the governors, running it into the ground. It's ridiculous. The states need money, blue states and red states that have government employees and hospital employees so that they can continue to stay employed. We need the help and support, both
I think there'll be a
the red
compromise. I do.
states and
think
the,
there'll be a compromise.
and
By the
I
way,
hope so. I hope
I
so.
believe there will be.
I think it's important to remember.
Look, you know what? The bottom line is we're right in a very emotional, passionate state right now where we all want our candidate to win. And we're very passionate about it. We're very emotional about it. But the bottom line is the day after the election, we got to shake hands. We've got to accept the results and we got to govern. And I believe that there will be a compromise bill that maybe Republicans aren't going to love very much. Maybe the Democrats aren't going to love very much, but that's usually the making of a good deal. That's a compromise. Each party has to give up a little bit. We'd like to see the money go to the people and not to government.
You know, Bruce,
We're going to try and work that out.
This is the Bruce Blakeman that Tracy and I remember. This is the Bruce Blakeman and the Republicans we all grew up with, who believed in coming together, having different philosophies, but shaking hands after a debate, shaking hands after an election, moving forward. Let's be very clear what's at stake for our country right now. A president who doesn't believe in that, who talks about dividing our country in this national pandemic between red and blue states, who doesn't advocate a peaceful transition of power. That's how high the stakes are in this election. And I would say,
I thought we were going to end on a high note.
this is a high note. This is a high note. And that is, we have the potential to come together in this election and change that direction. We can change that dialogue. We can change that attitude and go back to the concept that really distinguished our country throughout the world and made us such a successful example of a democracy throughout the world. We can still come together, but it's going to be about not just the election, Bruce, but Republicans also demanding that Donald Trump respect the will of the voters. That's their challenge.
Bruce, do you think that this style of politics, there was no part, the Republicans did not have a party platform. So we don't, in this past convention was the first one in I don't know how many years. Larry, you probably know this, but in a long, long time, there was no party platform, maybe 100 years.
I don't
So
know.
what happens if there is not a Donald Trump here? If he does lose, does his brand of politics continue? Does he continue? Or do things go back?
If you're asking me,
Are you asking me or
that the
Larry?
Republican Party, if Donald Trump loses and it's generally accepted, the Republican Party is going to go through some pretty powerful spasms. There are the so-called pure Trump Republicans, how powerful they will remain, who will be able to maintain this 20-25% of the electorate as a unified voting force. There will be the more moderate wing, more in the model of what a George Bush used to be, Bruce Blakeman has been, and they will either figure it out and come together and be a viable force, or they won't, and the Democratic Party will go through one of those relatively long periods of dominance until the world changes, the labels change, and one of the Democratic Party makes a horrible mistake, and a Republican rises and rebrands the party for more general consumption.
Well, I think, you asked me the question, and what I would say is this. I think that President Trump has been a phenomenon. I really do. I think that he has done more for democracy than anybody in the history of America other than our founding fathers and mothers, because look at the number of people that are voting.
Let me
finish.
Let's say that again.
He has addressed the American people
not Lincoln,
in
not
an
Roosevelt.
unfiltered way. He's not a politician. He doesn't mince his words. He's not everybody's cup of tea with respect to his style or delivery. But if you look at results, if you look what he's done for the economy, if you look what he's done to strengthen our military, if you look what he's done to protect our country, to fight for our country, to fight for American jobs, there is a president that has been there for all of the American people. And he is somebody that I believe that will be reelected because so many people love the fact that he tells it the way it is and he doesn't try to be politically correct. And he's results oriented. You do the job, you keep your job. You don't do the job, you get fired. That's the way he was as a business person. That's the way he is as a president.
Our time is drawing near. So
Before our time ends, I'm not going to respond to Bruce claiming that since the founding fathers, Donald
And
Trump has
mothers.
done more, founding fathers and mothers, Donald Trump's more for our democracy. I'll just get him a history book where you can read about Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and read about what Franklin Roosevelt did and the accomplishments of Harry Truman. So I'll just, and Eisenhower and the like. So I'm getting you a history book.
Robert, we'll let you start off. I'd like to get everybody to sort of their final advice to voters and making they may have made their decision in either in voting or in how to view what is going to take place over the next week or weeks or even or beyond, what they can look forward to here.
You know, I'd just like to share a thought, and this is for Larry Levy a bit too. I was very intrigued in 2018 when we saw the Republican conservative suburbs of America come together and elect Democratic members of Congress for the first time. We saw that blue wave from Orange County, California, through northern New Jersey, through Long Island, and we saw historic Democratic gains in a midterm election. And I think we're seeing something develop this year as well that continues that theme. And that is what unites us, and I know this sounds a bit idealistic in today's climate, what unites us is more than divides us. When Donald Trump says, as he did in a speech the other day, appealing to suburban women saying, I put your husbands back to work. And he waved the race card by saying, Cory Booker's going to be in charge of housing, referring to the African-American senator from New Jersey. Or he talked about Somalia moving next door to you. Tried to play the race card and spoke to women in the most condescending way, where many women are in fact the sole breadwinners in their home and are also holding jobs equal with their husbands. The point is, Donald Trump speaks to an era from the past where the racist dog whistles and the divisive, misogynistic messages may have had an impact decades ago in the 50s. But today we're seeing that rejected. We're seeing, especially in the suburbs, which are diverse, which have great diversity in population among Black and brown citizens and Asians and Chinese. And we're seeing women who are in many ways, many homes have women and men working together, all sharing in the responsibilities of providing and supporting their homes. You're seeing, I think, a unification of values, especially in our suburbs, where Donald Trump is out of step and out of touch and really speaking in a divisive way that worked decades ago. So I'm hoping in this election, it will be a message to Republicans, maybe they won't get it, but a message from our country that we're coming together to return to normalcy, to respond with respect to one another in terms of voting for decency, voting for respect for our Constitution and American principles, and voting to show respect for each other, standing above the kind of divisive and hateful rhetoric that has defined the past 4 years. So I'm hoping and believing we'll see a growing unity out of this election in our country that began in 2018.
Tracy?
That was a hell of a 30 seconds.
Yeah. We're having difficulty in judging time, it appears. Tracy?
Well,
I give up my time. Tracy can have my time.
It's okay. I will echo, what Robert said. I do agree with him. And, I think that we need to have a normal president, and we just don't have that right now. I think we're all exhausted. We're exhausted with fighting. We're exhausted with the tension. We're just exhausted. And, you know, women, I believe, are going to be the deciding factor of all of this. You know, when President Trump said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, he said to the women in the audience, I'm sending your men back to work. Like he doesn't understand that women work. It's just, he's from yesteryear. You know, suburban women, I believe, are on those lines because we want to have peace. We want to have unity. We want to have the economy grow, but we don't want to have this fight where people that don't normally scream at each other are screaming at each other. And what I think is happening right now, I do believe that the Democrats are voting for Joe Biden, but I think that there is a percentage of Republicans that are voting for Joe Biden too. So I believe that we are going to come together. I do believe that there'll be a peaceful transition because I'm going to call up Bruce Blakeman after the election and ask him to head down there. So, and I'm looking forward to moving forward and being unified again. Now I'll sit back and wait and see what Bruce is going to say.
Okay, Bruce, we'll let you, and we're going to let Larry finish because he'll keep to his time, and we'll get a chance to finish on a high note.
Well, when you talk about a normal president, we don't want a
Bruce,
president.
this is going to be 30 seconds, so.
We don't want a president who thinks he's running for the Senate, who thinks he's running against George Bush and has been living in his basement for the last 6 weeks. I don't think that's normal. But anyway, this is about jobs. It's about the economy. The GDP rose this quarter by 33%, the highest rate ever. This country's back on the road to the recovery because of Donald Trump. And if you want to keep your job, if you want a better job, if you want your wages to increase, if you want a better life for your family, then vote for Donald Trump.
Okay, Larry.
It's a very complicated campaign playing field. Latino males are telling pollsters that they're interested in voting for Donald Trump in larger numbers than they've supported a Republican. Take too long to go into why that might be. 18 to 29-year-olds are telling pollsters in the largest numbers we've ever seen that they're going to support the Democrat, but we don't know if they will come out. In the past, except for 2018, they haven't. Suburban women are telling pollsters that they are leaking is a torrent toward Biden, but Trump does not need many of them to rethink it and come back in a handful of suburban areas in a handful of states. So I think this is, whatever cliche you want, a nail biter, a cliffhanger. It's possible that Joe Biden could get 400 electoral votes. It's possible that Donald Trump can win by the same 30 or 35 that he won last time. Clearly, if Trump is reelected, it will be with a minority of the votes. But again, that's our system. And hopefully, now I express my personal opinion, hopefully it will not be decided by the courts in one direction or another.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all our panelists for a very spirited discussion. I know we had plenty of heat. I'd like to think that we had some light for our public. I'd like to thank everybody who's attended and who will be watching this subsequently. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Northwell Health. For those who are unable to watch today, a recording of the debate can be found of the discussion. Sometimes seems like a debate. Will be found on Blank State Media's website and YouTube channel. And you'll be able to go to the YouTube channel directly or by clicking on a link on our website. So again, thank you. And I would say my recommendation is if you haven't voted yet, please vote and hang in there. It's going to be an interesting ride. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank Rose.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming to our first annual Halloween special. This is great.
Don't forget the celebration of suburban diversity. We are back this year virtual.
Okay.
Hofstra University.
Good.
The town of Hempstead.
Thanks.
Oscar Clyde.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks.
Say
Thank you,
hi
everyone.
say hi to Don Clavin for me. And on behalf of Hofstra, we thank him for the $2 million.
It's our pleasure.
It really, actually, it was smart to give it to all the colleges, and it helped everybody open with a little more confidence.
Well, they are an important part of our culture and an important part of our economy.
All right.